Who's ready for some kung fu fighting? Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, bringing you a servant spotlight for everyone's favorite martial artist daddy, Li Shuwen Assassin. We'll be examining his stats and skills, as well as going over pointers at how to utilize him effectively, and an overall grade, comparing him to how he stacks up to the other 5-star servants. Now, onto Li's stats. Li Shuwen has a max HP of 12,568 and a max attack of 11,470, which becomes 10,323 due to his assassin class modifier. Compared to the other 5-star assassins, Li has slightly below average attack as well as the lowest HP in the group. And unfortunately, his stats don't fare much better against the rest of the 5-star servants, where he has below average attack and HP for his rarity. He does, however, have some decent hit counts with a 4-hit quick, 2 hits on his arts card, 1 hit on his buster, and 5 hits on his extra. Overall, Li Shuwen's stat spread heavily favors attack and offense over survivability. He has very good NP gain, mostly due to his high NP gain rate, but average star generating from just 1 quick card. Taking a look at his skills, Li's first skill is Chinese Martial Arts rank A+++. It ignores invincibility for 1 turn and increases his own crit damage for 1 turn between 50 and 100% depending on level. His second skill is Fear Boundary rank A-. It grants him evasion for 1 turn, and it also increases his own crit star gather rate for 1 turn between 300 and 500% and generates between 5 to 15 crit stars, both depending on level. And finally, his last skill is Intersection of Yin Yang rank B. This skill increases his own attack for 1 turn between 20 and 30%, then it further increases his attack for 3 turns between 10 to 20%, both depending on level, and it grants him 1 turn of debuff immunity. When it comes to passives, Li only has 1, and that's Veteran rank A+. It increases his arts card effectiveness and star generating both by 8%. As for his deck and Noble Phantasm, Li Shuwen has an Arts Buster deck with Quick, Arts Buster Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. His Noble Phantasm is Wu or Da, no second strike, and it deals significant damage to a single enemy with between a 900% and 1500% damage modifier depending on level. It also has an instant kill chance of 100%, and it reduces an enemy's defense for 3 turns between 20 and 40% depending on overcharge. And this Noble Phantasm can be upgraded via an interlude to increase the damage modifier on it to between 1200% and 1800% depending on level. Much like his fists, Li's Ascension mat requirements will show no mercy and leave you with no bones intact. For level ascension, he'll need 22 bones, 6 divine wines, 10 octuplet crystals, and 12 soundless bells. Bones can be farmed at XG in Fuyuki, where they have a 63% drop rate, or at XC for a slightly better AP efficiency. Divine wine drops at the Palace of the Dragon King in Agartha with a 12% drop rate, octuplet crystals have a 40% drop rate at Shangri-La in Agartha, and bells are best farmed at the Ba'men Cave in Lost Bell 3, where they have a 39% drop rate. For skill leveling, Li is going to require 15 octuplet crystals, 44 bones, 59 stingers, and 24 bells per skill. Stingers can be farmed at the Field of Reeds in Babylonia with a 62% drop rate. Li Shuwen is back, and he's undergone a whole class makeover, returning as an assassin. And not just an assassin, but an arts assassin, which is a rarity among the 5-stars. But as groundbreaking as that is, unfortunately stat-wise, Li is in a bad situation. Both his HP and attack are below average. So despite being an offensively focused servant, he doesn't have much attack to show for it. But like they say, it's not how much attack you have, but how you use it. And thankfully, Li's stellar NP gain and decent star generating help make up for what he lacks in other areas. His skills also make him much more deadly than he first appears on paper. His third skill, Intersection of Yin Yang, increases his attack by 30% for a turn, another 20% for 3 turns, and it grants him debuff immunity. The best way to think of this skill is as an attack-based mana burst that just transforms into a personal charisma after a turn, which is surprisingly good because it gives Li a much needed steroid to his damage during Noble Phantasm turns, so that he can inflict as much burst damage as possible while also giving him a decent attack buff the following turn so he can deal a bit more of follow-up damage for consistency. The debuff immunity for a turn doesn't hurt either. It can potentially save Lee from a stun or other nasty debuff in some tougher fights. Lee does have other damage buffs in his kit though, in the form of his first skill, Chinese martial arts. This skill increases Lee's crit damage by a monstrous 100%, and it grants him ignore invincibility for a turn. Invincibility Pierce is an excellent piece of utility since a lot of enemy servants rely on evade and invincibility spam to protect themselves. So thanks to this skill, there is very little that most enemies can do to counter Lee's damage. Speaking of which, the huge buff to crit damage helps Lee put out some insane single target burst damage if he's able to crit. And thankfully, critting is no problem for Lee thanks to his final skill, Sphere Boundary. This skill not only gives Lee an evade, but also increases his star absorption by 500% and generates 15 crit stars. This is a very powerful setup skill for obvious reasons. It not only provides Lee with enough star absorb to attract the stars, but even provides stars on its own, very similar to Lancer Artoria Alter's protection from World's End. In combination with Chinese martial arts, Lee can use these two skills to essentially give himself perfect setup for a turn of crazy crit damage, which eliminates the inconsistency issue that most crit servants suffer from. All of Lee's skills are great, but I recommend leveling Intersection of Yin Yang first because it provides the best damage buff, followed by Chinese martial arts for the crit damage, and then Sphere Boundary last since it's slightly more situational. Lee's Noble Phantasm is a single target arts nuke that deals a ton of damage. It also has a chance to instant kill enemies, and it reduces an enemy's defense for 3 turns. The instant kill effect is mostly irrelevant since the chance of instant killing an enemy boss is almost non-existent. But that doesn't really matter much because this Noble Phantasm will probably kill most bosses in one hit from the damage alone. Seriously, this Noble Phantasm damage is no joke, as I'm sure you can see from the footage in this video. And this Noble Phantasm even received a buff recently in JP, which is what makes it so deadly. And this about sums up Lee perfectly. He is an offensive powerhouse capable of dealing very high burst damage through his Noble Phantasm and his crits. The combination of his Mana Burst and Invincibility Pierce makes his Noble Phantasm particularly powerful in difficult content, since it can get through most enemy defenses and deliver a devastating blow. The defense down debuff also gives his Noble Phantasm a bit of utility, and it even activates before damage so that Lee can take full advantage of it himself. But even aside from his NP, Lee has tremendous power as a crit DPS, since he can easily set himself up for crit Brave Chains, and he has a huge crit damage modifier. Another thing that Lee has going for him is his impressive NP gain. He isn't exactly an NP looper or anything, but he can get off multiple NPs in most battles, so break bars aren't much of a problem. In fact, one of the best ways to use Lee against enemies with multiple break bars is to have him Noble Phantasm one turn, and then follow up the next turn with a crit Brave Chain using his first skill, which can potentially knock off 2 break bars in 2 turns since Lee's damage is just that good. Unfortunately though, there is a trade-off for this damage. Lee's biggest issue, much like his Lancer version, remains his cooldowns. Since most of his skills only have 1 turn of uptime, they are on cooldown for most of the battle. So even though Lee can Noble Phantasm multiple times, while his skills are on cooldown, his damage falls off dramatically. Once Lee NPs once and gets out his 1 turn of crit damage, he's going to be sitting on cooldowns for a while, not being able to contribute much. And that plays into his other major issue, which is his lack of versatility. In case you've missed it, I've said the word damage a lot in the spotlight, and that's because that's really all Lee can do. Outside of the moderate defense down debuff on his NP, he doesn't really contribute much to the team, nor does he have any unique abilities or a niche like some of the other top tier assassins do. Simply put, Lee can be very one-dimensional, and he can run out of gas quickly. There are 2 major team comps that you can build around Lee: crit DPS or NP spam. Both have their advantages. In a crit build, Lee's burst damage will be much lower, but his overall DPS will be much more consistent, so it can be good for longer fights. If this is the route you want to go, then I recommend surrounding Lee with allies who can grant him high uptime crit damage buffs and star generating, like Chiron, Lanling, and Caesar. Lanling and Chiron both have very strong crit buffs that they can offer to Lee that can stick around for most of the battle, with Chiron being a better offensive team option, while Lanling is better suited to a defensive playstyle. Caesar is an excellent budget option since he also has quite a strong targetable crit buff and can be a good star generator. Conversely, the advantage of focusing on an NP-based arts team for Lee is that it maximizes burst damage, which is helpful for short fights. For this approach, I recommend pairing Lee with allies who can buff his arts card effectiveness, his attack, and his NP gain, like Nero Bride, Tamamo, and Ryoma. All three can buff Lee's NP gain significantly. Bride and Tamamo also provide strong damage steroids and healing for a more balanced playstyle, while Ryoma's short cooldown buffs can help Lee with consistency as well as damage. Lee's Bondcraft Essence is old and strong. It buffs the party's arts card effectiveness by 10% and their crit damage by 15%. Not a bad CE, but there are far better options for Lee. For crit builds, I recommend craft essences that can buff crit damage or star absorb, like Gem Mage Craft, Talk on the Hot Sands, Another Ending, or Sailor in White. If you'd rather maximize your NP damage, then you should go for CEs that buff arts card effectiveness or NP damage, like Royal Icing, Sign of a Smiling Face, Collide Sapphire, and Black Grail. In the future, I recommend picking up Mystery Treasure for Lee because it buffs arts card and buster card effectiveness, as well as crit damage and grants starting NP charge. This craft essence is going to be dropping with the Imaginary Scramble event in 2022. As far as command codes go with Gakyo no Fude because it gives an extra 20% crit damage to arts cards, and it can come in handy for keeping Lee's damage up while his skills are on cooldown. Overall, Lee Shuwen excels at being a high burst damage specialist. His powerful attack-based mana bursts, coupled with his eventual NP interlude, allow his Noble Phantasm to hit incredibly hard. His Invincibility Pierce and Defense Down debuff give him that extra bit of utility to make him excel in tough content like challenge quests, and he is an excellent crit DPS who can set himself up for big damage. However, his lack of versatility outside of just being a damage dealer can hurt him, especially considering the competition within his own class. And his longer cooldowns make it difficult for him to keep up sustained damage in longer fights. So with that said, Lee Shuwen gets a B+ from me. I wish I could make it a B+++ because in my opinion, Lee is really good at what he does, and he's arguably the best burst damage assassin in most circumstances once he gets his interlude. But the other top tier single target assassins just offer a little bit more, with some of them even being completely broken, which we'll get into in our next Assassin Spotlight. Still though, if you need a powerful assassin, or if you missed out on Shiki, then you can't go wrong with Old Man Lee. And those are my thoughts on Lee Shuwen. I should also mention that he looks incredibly badass, and he has that amazing 1-inch punch extra attack, so you should probably just roll for him for that alone. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you haven't already, please do check out the Beni-enma spotlight that I have up. She'll also be on Rate Up for this event, so that'll be linked on screen and in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.